Welcome to the Podkey summary of design immersive environments for visionOS apps and the spatial web from WWDC 2026. Today's story is really about how these visionOS environments stop being pretty backdrops and start feeling like places. The big idea is that realism comes from a stack of deliberate choices: true depth, careful scouting, scene cleanup, motion, lighting, and especially sound, all shaped by a clear reason for why the environment exists in the first place. And once you hear how much planning goes into a riverbank, a moon surface, or a stand of palm trees, it gets very hard to look at a simple panorama the same way again. The design team starts with a basic question that saves them from a lot of pain later. Why are we building this environment at all? They ask what the place should feel like, what qualities it needs to convey, and how someone is actually going to use it. That early clarity ends up steering everything else, from composition to lighting to whether sound belongs there at all. It also keeps them from expensive rework, which is one of those boring production truths that becomes very exciting once you're the one paying for mistakes. What separates these environments from a flat 360 photo is true depth and parallax. When you move your head, perspective changes the way it does in the real world. And that's a huge part of why the scene feels believable instead of pasted around you. Add motion and spatial audio on top of that, and the experience starts to land less like media and more like standing somewhere. That intent shows up very clearly in use case specific design. For the keynote environment, the team intentionally leaves out ambient sound and pushes the lighting toward a virtual stage, so it feels more like presenting to a live audience. A media viewing environment gets built differently. There, the scene is shaped around a big screen and optimized for a central viewing line, because the goal is a cinematic experience, not presentation practice. Same platform, very different emotional job descriptions. When the team scouts real locations like Mount Hood, they're not just collecting pretty views. They're figuring out the primary viewpoint and designing around the fact that visionOS shows about an 81-degree field of view when you're fully immersed. That matters because the frame needs to work where people will actually be looking. Scouting also tells them what to leave out, like a road, heavy vegetation, or any other detail that would quietly wreck the composition. For synthetic environments, the reference work gets even more specific. The moon environment leaned on Apollo mission photography to check assumptions and settle visual discrepancies instead of trusting memory or movie logic. For Yosemite, the team used digital elevation models and orbital data to run lighting studies at exact dates and times, so the environmental light would line up with reality. It's a nice reminder that realism often comes from research, long before it comes from rendering. In pre-production, they break an environment into layers from background to foreground and decide early which parts need motion and which need spatial audio. That sounds technical, but it's really about coherence. If you know ahead of time that water needs to move, clouds need drift, and a specific rock formation should carry the sound of rippling water, you can build the assets and pipeline around that instead of bolting it on later. The same kind of discovery happened with the Jupiter environment, where building a scale model of the solar system revealed that a dynamic passage of time feature wasn't optional. It became a core requirement. There's also a very practical image quality target here, about 40 pixels per degree. For a full 360 panorama, that works out to roughly 14,400 by 7,200 pixels if you want it to stay sharp in the headset. The recommended capture setup is equally specific. A tripod around 1 meter high, a second camera around 2 meters for fill-in views, and bracketed exposures to handle everything from bright sun to deep shadow. That's the difference between a scene that feels crisp and one that starts falling apart when you actually look around. On location, they also capture LiDAR and photogrammetry point clouds. Those aren't just used to kick off 3D meshes. They provide precise distance measurements, which can expose things like hidden slopes that matter later when you're placing assets accurately. For lighting reference, they shoot Macbeth charts and chrome and gray spheres, so the CG work can match real color temperature and light intensity instead of guessing. Then comes cleanup, removing rig parts, footprints, and distracting plants through matte painting and CG rendering, while keeping color balance and lighting consistent enough that the edits disappear. Once the panorama is refined, it gets projected onto a 3D mesh in UV space. Any areas the original shoot didn't fully capture get filled with secondary photos or CG renders, and then the team does A and B comparisons between the source panorama and the textured mesh to make sure sharpness and scale still feel right. And because your eyes can get weirdly forgiving after staring at the same image too long, they use tricks to catch problems, like flipping the whole scene left to right. They'll also push gamma and gain to extremes to expose color mismatches, value inconsistencies, or lost image data that might show up on other displays. A lot of the immersion comes from effects that are clever, partly because they don't call attention to themselves. Clouds in Bora Bora use UV flow maps so different parts of the sky can move at different speeds, which creates a huge sense of depth without a huge performance hit. Palm tree shadows are pre-rendered into flipbook textures that scroll across the terrain, giving you soft, believable shadow motion without expensive real-time lighting. Palm fronds use hierarchical vertex animation with layered sine waves, so the trunk can sway slowly while the leaflets twitch with finer, faster movement. Water shading shifts hue, saturation, and brightness over time to mimic subsurface sunlight scattering, which is a much cheaper way to get convincing water than full ray tracing. And spatial audio ties the whole thing together. If water sounds are placed near a rock formation, your attention goes there almost automatically, and the place feels anchored around you. The broader philosophy underneath all of this is intentional removal. Every addition and every subtraction has to earn its place, which is a healthy rule in any visual medium and maybe, especially in immersive ones, where clutter can become exhausting fast. The team also deliberately tries to break its own designs, looking for the version that unexpectedly works better once something gets removed, moved, or rethought. That kind of self-editing is probably the least flashy part of the process, and maybe the most important. So the headline here isn't just that these environments look good. It's that they're built like experiences with composition, evidence, and technical shortcuts, all serving a very specific feeling. And honestly, once you know somebody is out there testing gamma, measuring slopes, and worrying about the moral weight of a stray road in the background, the realism starts to make a lot more sense. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.